From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Friday, June 7th. I'm Abby Larico. The Missouri Department of Conservation has a new director after 30 years. Jason Sumners says conservation work has evolved over that time.
We really find ourselves today not in an era of restoration, but really an era of integration and trying to integrate the work of conservation into so many other aspects of people's lives as we recognize that nature is so important.
St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Kellogg spoke with Sumners on the first day of his new job. That interview is coming up on The Gateway. Governor Mike Parson recently announced 19 appointments to boards and commissions across Missouri. Of those 19 appointments, 13 of them were prior appointments that Parson issued in April that did not receive state Senate approval at the time. Parson's spokesperson said in May that 4 of the appointments were withdrawn because State Senator Stephen Roberts from St. Louis blocked them. The 4 that were withdrawn and are now reappointed are former St. Louis Mayor Lyda Krewson to the University of Missouri Board of Curators, Winston Calvert and Daniel Isom to the Bi-State Development Board, and Reverend Darrell Gray to the Missouri Workforce Development Board. Because the new appointments were made while the Missouri Senate wasn't in session, they will not need approval until next session. As city leaders and developers look to reinvigorate downtown St. Louis, a new report has some recommendations for the Gateway Mall. It calls for reframing the green space that stretches from the Arc to City Park Soccer Stadium to help bolster new economic opportunities. As St. Louis Public Radio's Eric Schmid reports, this would prioritize downtown becoming a social district.
The study by the Urban Land Institute Advisory Services Program was commissioned by Greater St. Louis, Inc. and the St. Louis Development Corporation. It lays out a vision to replace the office-based economy of the past with a more community and neighborhood-driven one, including more businesses and other street-level activities for pedestrians. Catherine Homaker is an associate director at PGAV Planners.
Downtown, for example, has a lot of reasons to come and visit, but we don't do a great job of providing a lot of reasons for people to stay.
Homaker wasn't involved in the final draft of the study, but says the transition it lays out for St. Louis is similar to the challenges many other cities in the country are facing. I'm Eric Schmid, St. Louis Public Radio.
The St. Louis husband and wife convicted of misdemeanors for pointing guns at racial justice protesters in their neighborhood have had the incident wiped from their records. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reports a judge expunged the convictions of Mark and Patricia McCloskey. The attorney and his wife gained national notoriety for the 2020 confrontation, in which the two were seen pointing their guns at demonstrators passing their Central West End home. Mark McCloskey also ran for Senate in 2022, but lost in the GOP primary to Eric Schmidt. Governor Mike Parson had already pardoned the McCloskeys. Now, according to the Post-Dispatch, Mark McCloskey is threatening to sue the city for the return of 2 guns seized when he pled guilty to misdemeanor assault. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act will now almost certainly expire. The U.S. House of Representatives adjourned for the weekend without taking up legislation to extend the act. It's set to expire on Monday. The legislation created a fund to compensate people who got sick after exposure to the U.S.'s World War II-era nuclear weapons programs. The policy that expires Monday does not include St. Louis, but the Senate passed a bill to extend the fund and add coverage for people in parts of St. Louis. Missouri Representatives Ann Wagner and Cori Bush announced a potential path forward Thursday. They co-sponsored an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that would extend and expand the fund. There's also still a chance the House could take up the Senate's bill in the coming weeks. Now, both efforts would have to revive a dead program. A small water district north of Alton will soon start a big overhaul of their system with the help of a U.S. Department of Agriculture loan. St. Louis Public Radio's Will Bauer has more on the Fosterburg Water District's plans for the $4.2 million.
The Water District serves a little more than 3,000 residents in Madison and Macoupin counties. As the cost of maintaining infrastructure and water rates is on the rise, the Fosterburg District is teaming up with 6 other utility providers. These 7 will build their own water treatment plant and a 50-mile pipeline to connect the communities. The underlying goal of the endeavor is to maintain local control and keep water rates from creeping up. That's according to District Manager Mark Vumard.
Getting to the point where if you got money, you got water. If you don't have money, you're not going to have water. And we're trying to make a change.
The USDA loan was designed to improve rural water systems. Vumard hopes they complete the project by 2027. I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Illinois public libraries that don't have the resources they need to serve their communities will soon have access to $2 million in grants from the state, Secretary of State Alexi Giannoulias announced yesterday. The fund could be used for expanding their online collections, purchasing mobile apps, accommodating their service for persons with disabilities, and more. Giannoulias says libraries must be able to modernize with their communities to better assist them.
Even at times in the pandemic when physical libraries were closed, they loaned ebooks, CDs, and digital movies. More recently, computer labs at public libraries have become a true lifeline for people applying for jobs and doing their first Zoom interviews.
Giannoulias also says 113 Illinois public libraries are eligible for this grant. Missouri's Department of Conservation has a new director. Jason Sumners, a former deputy director of the department, is taking the reins from Sara Parker Pauley, who stepped down after 30 years. St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Kellogg spoke with Sumners about how conservation work has changed over the years and his goals for the department.
The department has a broad mission, right, in terms of being responsible for protecting and conserving the fish, forest, and wildlife resources of the state. And the second part of that mission is in a way that citizens can learn about and use and appreciate those resources. So it's anything from birds to bats to fish, right? So we have a very broad mission, and it includes the forest in which those critters inhabit. So from education programs to protecting and conserving the resources, it takes our more than 1,800 MDC employees to accomplish the mission.
You know, I think a common misconception also is that you all are in charge of the parks. Do you think that's a fair assessment, that there's kind of a conflation between the Parks Department and what you all do?
Yeah, there certainly is a confusion between the difference between the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Department of Natural Resources, and specifically state parks, in that the MDC is responsible for more than 1,000 conservation areas, but we don't do the typical show up to a camping spot kinds of experiences that State Parks has. State Parks also has a natural preservation, historic preservation kind of responsibility. So we have lots of public land in which we're trying to conserve to protect fish, forest, and wildlife resources. As a result, citizens can utilize those. It's just a very different experience.
How has conservation, the idea, the methods, the work changed over the years?
So the work of conservation has changed a ton. You know, when we think about when the department started, many of our forests had been cut over. Many of our habitats had been significantly impacted. Our streams were choked full of gravel. And so we went through this era of restoring species and restoring habitats. And today we find ourselves in a place where the challenges are more gnarly, to be quite honest, from, just the social pressures, the continued development, the challenges that we face there. And we really find ourselves today not in an era of restoration, but really an era of integration, and trying to integrate the work of conservation into so many other aspects of people's lives, as we recognize that nature is so important to our quality of life as citizens. How do we start to think about nature in a slightly different way, and thinking about those day-to-day decisions that we make that can benefit nature?
How do you feel climate change has affected the work of conservation?
So certainly climatic patterns are changing, and the environments that we live in are much more extreme. And so when we talk about these changing climatic patterns it seems to never be an average year, right? We're coming out of 2 extremely dry years to a wet year, right? And so when we think about infrastructure that's boat ramps and accesses and wetlands, we're trying to think about those in the future design of those in a system that is much more dynamic and much more volatile. And so how do we create landscapes and infrastructure that is more resilient to changing conditions?
What are you wanting to achieve in your tenure as the head of the Department of Conservation?
I mean, we are a citizen-created agency, and I think we all take that public trust very seriously. And so continued work with the many, many conservation partners that we have across the state to continue this mission, and the real vision of a future where healthy fish, forest, and wildlife are appreciated by all, and that nature becomes an integral part of everyone's lives.
That was Jason Sumners, the new director of the Missouri Department of Conservation, speaking with St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Kellogg. You can read more of the interview with Sumners at stlpr.org. Our Fred Ehrlich edited that piece. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri-St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Abby Larico, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway. Have a great weekend.